on this computer. All righty. I have to do one more thing. Believe it or not, it's like too complicated for me to handle. You know, if I would be super successful one day, then I have all these technical people around me, and they take care of all this stuff. That would be awesome, wouldn't that be, Hans? That's a good role for you.
Because I'm so technical. Hey, you should go and ask Dr. Phil if he can
Yeah.
help you out.
All right. Okay. Well, welcome. This is Shah from the place. Today, we're going to talk about, are there such things like common thinking mistakes, and why is that important to know, and how has that remotely something to do with what Shah is doing, right? Well, one of the old things that Shah always says is change your mind and you change your life. So it would have a direct impact there. But strangely enough, it also has a lot of to do with the four levels of consciousness that we spoke about earlier. And I also say welcome to the people, by the way, if you listen to my podcast, Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse. So on Tuesday, I always do a double recording, one of this and one on my podcast. If you just want to listen to me and not want to see this beautiful face, then you just go to my podcast, or you just turn off the camera or something, whatever, right? That's what I do when I see Hans. But now I have to leave Hans on because Belinda is next to him. So at least that's something to see. Belinda and the bass. It's so funny, guys. All right. So with the raise of hands, do you believe that there is something like common thinking mistakes? Are there things that we can talk about that you say, yeah, that is actually that's true. There are common thinking mistakes, and what can you do about it, and stuff like that, right? Well, I don't see any raising of hands, but I pretend that everyone agrees with me here. Says yes, there is something like that, thinking mistakes, and strangely enough, if a lot of the things what we do as mental coaches, but also as life coaches, is actually the majority is helping people to understand the way they think, right? And often that results in the habits that we have. That's actually 80% of the work that we do in life coaching is that. It's helping and supporting people to change their habits. And habits are often a result of just thinking mistakes. So let's go through a few of them. If you research it varies between 8 and 15 different types of thinking mistakes. Depends a little bit what what theory you try to follow. But there are a couple of things that you might not be so aware of, but that we do every day in our life, right? So number one is we surround ourselves with information that we actually already believe ourselves. That's typically what we do. We put Facebook friends, we follow Facebook friends of people that kind of think like, oh yeah, that's kind of like, I like what he says, which basically means I kind of agree what he says. You might not always understand it, but one of the reasons why you go to the place is because most of the time, either you think, it's nice to meet Irene and Danielle and Jasmine here, and I don't care so much about Jean. That could be true too. But then at least you agree about with the people that I hang out with. But most of the time, we hang out with things that we actually already believe in. If you're a ballroom dancer, you typically go to ballroom competitions and you don't go to a hip hop competition. Does that make sense? Because we believe that, our dancing, we like that more. If we believe that riding a bicycle is good for us, we typically hang out and read magazines around bicycle, right? But that doesn't mean that you immediately disagree with the fact that mountain climbing could be also good for you, but it's not so much in your belief system. And that goes, of course, a little bit further and further. Strangely enough, if you think about the last uh, uh, elections here in the United States, then we have a few big conventions, the Democratic Convention, and we have the Republican Convention. And guess what? The Republican Convention is mostly visited by Republicans. Wow, that's a kind of a surprise, right? And the Democratic Convention is mostly followed by The Democrats, isn't that crazy? Catholic churches are mostly filled with Catholics, right? It's that is the weirdest thing, right? So in Salt Lake City, that's the city of the Mormons. There are mostly Mormons who live in Salt Lake City, right? So you can make a little bit fun of it and stuff like that, but that's what it is. We tend to go to something that we do. Hans says that the churches are empty. Well, not here in the United States, my friend. Churches here are very full. It's a very good business, by the way. It's a very good business. So we tend to listen to it. So if you have sometimes you have a change of pastors in a church, and then you start to wait out if this guy says something that you like. And what we like tends to be what our internal beliefs are. Does that make sense? But I mean, it doesn't take you much if you really take some time to think about these things, that doesn't always make you grow. I mean, I'm not saying that you constantly need to listen to people that you don't agree with, or that you constantly need to listen to the things that you don't believe in, but it serves you well if you inform yourself broadly. Does that make sense? Yeah, that makes it for a lot of people that makes sense. But if I look at Facebook, with all respect of all the people that are with me on Facebook, actually I don't see that a lot. I don't see there's a lot of tolerance of people expressing different opinions, right? So we immediately want to either defriend them or want to punch them down or whatever, right? Because we don't agree with them, which actually is a really good thing, right? As long as we don't hurt each other, and as we do it within, the levels of respect that I think everyone has, hopefully has a little bit of understanding, then I think we should be very much able to express our dispute. So it's a very big big um, mistake we make. And there is actually a word in psychology, that's a word, we call it confirmation bias. We try to find that, we try to do that constantly. And it goes in any way. If you have a certain disease, if you're depressed, we hang out and we'll look for people that confirms that we are, the right in a rightful way to be depressed. If we are poor, then we say, no wonder we are poor because we live in a poor neighborhood, or I am Asian and all Asians are poor, right? We find all kind of things that confirms in the beliefs that we have. And we do it all the time, by the way. We do that all the time. I make a surprise that even was not written in those psychological articles that I was reading in preparation of this, why that is. There's also a physical reason why we do that. We'll come back on that later. Um, this one I thought was really fun. We tend to believe the swimmer's body illusion. That's how one psychologist started to call it. And we took it over, the swimmer's body illusion. So that's a little bit like me, right? So you see this delta, and that's me. So we all believe that this is the perfect body. Yeah. So, but the strange thing is that it's coming from the fact that a lot of people who want to go in swimming, that they believe you have to have a certain body type to be an excellent Olympic swimmer, right? And if you don't have that body type, you can never be a good swimmer. And that's a very wrong mistake. What we forget to see is that the swimmer, like Michael Phelps, to become this awesome, he has the body type, but that to become this awesome swimmer is actually more found in the way how he practiced and with whom he practiced with, right? And very little to do with his body, to be honest. It has more to do how he practiced. So we tend to already believe like, oh my gosh, if I'm from the Netherlands, then I can never become a certain thing, right? White men can jump, which is common understanding here in basketball. I think as well. If you're only 5 feet and you want to be a basketball player, okay, that's a little bit hard. There are certain things where body types do help, but a lot of things in dancing that is constantly changed, right? We always think, oh, they have the perfect dance body type. And then like Hans, for instance, but then too bad his partner doesn't fit that. But yeah, that's not Hans' mistake, of course. That's all the partner mistake, right? But we see all type of body types becoming world champions dancing. Seriously true. right? I mean, there is always something like, yeah, if you're hugely obese, don't try to be a perfect dancer because that's really hard, right? But some people take that actually really far. For instance, if you specifically look at the classical forms of dancing and you come to a classical ballet academy, they just measure your bones and then they say out. Seriously true. I know quite a few people pretty high up in classical ballet, and that happens. And that person was out could be a much better dancer than all the other ones who let in, but they don't care about it because they say in the end we want to have all the same. And that actually encouraged the swimmer's body illusion. But don't make that mistake yourself, right? Most of the things that we achieve in life has nothing to do with the qualities that you bring into life, right? And that's all to do with the practice and with all the things that you do it. And we admire more if Hans decides to change his career and become a basketballer, and he practiced so hard that he reached the top. I'm sure he will become one of the most famous basketballers in the world, right? Does that make sense? This is for the people that have a tendency to depression, right? And so we tend to worry. It's literally a mistake. We tend to worry about things that are already lost. We worry often more, if you measure that, with things that we already lost than the things that we're about to lose. Think about a relationship that's over. It sits in our mind constantly, all those kind of things. So we tend to do that. And I'm sure not all of these things, they apply to you, but some of these things apply to you. And I would definitely um, stimulate you in this case to do something about it, because it's a remember the topic of today, it's called a thinking mistake, and it means it can be corrected. It's not like, oh, that's just the way how I am. I always think negatively. I always think a little bit more about the past. I always think I have honestly, I have a little bit a tendency to to think and stay with my thoughts in the things that I had. It's a tendency. I know that for myself. I think you might not think that as an always positive person, but I do think about it. I think often about the family that I always had in the US, and suddenly I didn't have it. And if I drive through the neighborhood here and I come to certain neighborhood, if I am in a certain mood, I know already that I'm not going to drive through that neighborhood because it sparks something bad in me. But so I'm over the point that I indulge myself in negative thinking, but some people like to do that. They go to a place that sparks some sort of negative or drama emotions with them, and then they can indulge themselves, and don't do that, right? That's not how you train your brain to do something else. But what you need to do is acknowledge for yourself that you have these tendencies in your mind. And if you this the first time that you heard about these things, you just might think, oh, that's just me. That's me. That's how Danielle is, or that's me, or that's how Irene is, or that's me, how the boss is. Um, so, and you might not think that, oh my, a lot of people have that, and it is literally a thinking mistake, like a little default in your car, and it can be corrected. That's what you need to take away from today, that these things are actually, you are not designed to think that way. Does that make any sense? Um, these are one of my favorites now, and I group them all in one bucket. We have a tendency to think that we are psychic. We think we can predict the future. No one can predict the future, trust me, right? So some people say, oh, I have to do a presentation tomorrow. Oh, I know it already goes wrong. It doesn't have to be like big things like a disaster's going to happen, but a lot of people do that, right? It's like there's a banana peel. Oh, there I go again. You know, I call that, if you have followed my coaching, I call that the banana peel effect, right? And that's incorrect predictions. It doesn't exist. Other people think actually that they are psychic and they can read minds. That's only one person in that group that actually can read minds, and that's me. That's Belinda. She already knows what you want to eat, right? And I can give you other things, but I'm not going there. But yeah, Belinda is a good is a good mind reader. Yeah, so we do that often. Like we often think like, oh my gosh, she's a mind reader. So That's it. We often think that we are psychic, so we become fortune tellers. We know it because, yeah, I know it for a fact because I've been through it so many times. Well, literally, you don't know it. And here is one thing. It's kind of funny because I had this discussion with Irene, and if it comes to playing the lottery and stuff like that, uh, guys, if you really need to take some basic mathematics to me, then you can hire me too, right? But there is no such thing. If you buy a lot, let's replay the Staatsloterij in the Netherlands. Every time you buy that ticket, you have an equal chance as the one before, depending on how many tickets are sold, right? It's not like if I won it 5 times already, that the 6 times I have less chance. It doesn't exist, right? If you have to fill out 12 numbers, it doesn't really, out of 100, it doesn't really matter whether you pick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, or random numbers or your lucky numbers, right? That has nothing to do with it, right? It doesn't exist. Even if a number 99, was drawn 1,000 times, right? Then that doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean like, oh, that is just, you have more chance if you play 99. No, it's every time it's random. It's just basic probability, right? A lot of people don't understand basic probability, right? So that's all in the factors of prediction. What we also do, by the way, goes maybe a little bit too deep. We think too linear, right? We have a group of 10 people, 5 people are black, then we say 50% of the population is black. It's only 10 people. That's just not representative of it. Does that make any sense? So that's what we do. Actually, it's even worse. We actually think to say, okay, the two of us, one of us said no, so 50% of the population said no. That's even worse, right? We seriously do it. Hans, I know you read newspapers, and Melinda too, and other people might do too. But think about it. I have been in mathematics world for a long time, but I said, what's the point? Everyone thinks it's linear anyhow. They have no idea what a regression or something means anyhow. No one knows about this stuff. So we all think linear, right? The only mathematical thing we know is average. And did you know, for instance, that average doesn't even have to exist to have an average? Does that make sense? If one person is only 5 feet tall and the other person is 10 feet tall, right? Then the average is 7.5 feet tall, but person doesn't exist. Does that make sense? So then we say, yeah, but the average 7.5, it doesn't exist. So if you are a clothing if you make clothes and you measure that and you have a dumb as a researcher, he come back, oh, okay, we need to make 7.5. That doesn't exist, right? So that is false predictions. We do it all the time. Seriously, all the time. And whether you do it mathematical, whether you think you're a psychic, whether you, whatever, what it is, whether you think, it is, I know it because I've been through it. Okay, so that's fine, you know. So, and that's very close to generalization. Yeah, that's like the overgeneralization or global thinking, which is really horrible, guys. That's a horrible thing that we do. And seriously, so I made some fun, but this is also a little bit hard. If you think about the immigrant problem in the Netherlands, which actually irritated me so much that's maybe one, if there was a reason why I wanted to leave the Netherlands at some point in time, it is because of that fact. I can tell you this, right? Even if every Moroccan youth would throw stone to someone's window, they still don't do it because they're Moroccan. They do it because they're just bad people. Does that make sense? Right? We cannot generalize that. That is really dangerous. We do that all the time. Yeah. Even if I'm just doing it on these heavy topics, right? So a common mistake in the in the US is saying, yeah, black people are worse because there are more black people in the prison. It's normal. See, I proved it. I just proved it to you. That doesn't mean anything, right? It's very dangerous thinking if we do overgeneralize, and we all do it. And I'm sure if you have a conversation with me, that there are many areas in which I do it too, right? And that's what I want to say. I don't want to say don't stop doing that thinking. I just want to say be just aware of that happens. And if that happens with other people, except if you're nearly as perfect as me, then it also happens in you. Does that make sense? Right? And that's the only thing you can change. And there are some times that I think, oh, those people. Yeah, but if we use those people or they too much in our thinking, then we are overgeneralizing, which is a very dangerous thinking mistake. It's actually one of the reasons why World War II happened. And the extinction, well, not the extinction, but at least the killing of 6 million Jews is because of this fact, this thinking mistake. And Hitler was so smart that he knew how to manipulate it. And he actually found proof for it, like I just did with the Afro American population in the United States. Is there are more average, on the percentage wise, there are more African Americans, and it's seriously true in the in prison. So there must be more bad people than white people. There are hardly actually Asians in prison. It's a very small population of people of the Asian community that goes in prison. So we must actually be really good people. See, that doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah, a lot of engineering and mathematicians of the Asian community, India and China, actually moved to the US. So Asian people have now the label. That's my next one. We have the label that we are better in mathematics than other people. That's not. It's just that's all nonsense, right? That's all nonsense, right? Is there some sort of truth in there? If you would research it, is it true that some population areas are better in other things than other things? Yeah, sure, of course. That is definitely true, right? If you grew up in a community of fishermen, then of course that then you have typically a little bit better fishermen in that population than the people who grew up in the Himalayas, right? Because there's no boats in the Himalayas. My system is freezing up a little bit. I was trying to look something. And then we have something, and I specifically wanted to point it out because of a conversation that my good friend Hans was in, and that's labeling. Yeah, labeling is also a thinking mistake. So you could label someone else, and you could label you could label yourselves, right? And that is putting a label on someone. So if someone makes a mistake, and now let me take a very unrealistic example, but if Hans makes a mistake, right, you could do two things. You could say, oh, Hans made a mistake, or you could think, what an idiot, right? And when you think what an idiot, it's not a nice thing to say, by the way, but Hans is always such a good subject of that, right? But do you know what you do? You put a label on Hans, and the next time you see it, if you do that just 2-3 times, you never would look at Hans in the same way because you already put that word um, idiot on him, which is actually you condition yourself to think that you actually have to do with an inferior person in this case. Now it's I mean, I'm always taking a little bit the funny side of bringing this, but you can hear that it's very dangerous to do. We do that often instead of just saying, hey, he made a mistake. Even if you make 10 mistakes, it's never an idiot, right? But you could also do that positive, right? If someone is doing a lot of good things, right? That doesn't make his his bad things good. Does that make sense? So it took me a long time. So my to give you a very personal insight in this, because after all, we have a link with abuse victims too, is my dad tend to give us a little bit more than just the usual spanking, right? He literally beat us up, to say that. But in my mind, my dad did so many good things that I could not judge him over the things that he did bad. Well, I don't have to make him all bad because he did that, but I also don't make to have him really good. I just have to see what's going on in a certain situation. So one of my friends said, all the good things that he did, that doesn't make the bad things that he did better. right? You can still say to your dad, saying that there was, I mean, I love you for all the good things that you did, but that one thing that you did there, that was not so good. Can we talk about it? That's a better thing than think about it that he's a pure bad guy or don't want to accept how bad he is, and you want to constantly try to say, oh yeah, but he's such a good guy, he never is making mistakes. You better look at the facts. Does that make sense? Right? And it could also be the other way around, right? If someone had a really bad life and did a lot of bad things in his life, it often for that person takes a long time to get rid of the label that we have put on that person. You know, we say once a thief, always a thief, right? In a lot of cases, that's that good. But if we talk about forgiveness in the world, you know, then we have to get rid of those labels. Now, the labels that we put on other people is easy to understand, but sometimes we also put the labels on ourselves. So if we are not successful in the beginning of our life, very often people start to see that you're a loser and they go with that label on, I will never succeed in it. You know, I will, because I'm an idiot, or I'm this, I'm that. So we put labels on ourselves more than Hans included me in one discussion of a post from someone in the UK, I believe, Hans. But yeah, this person admitted on Facebook saying, yeah, I put labels on myself. And labels on yourself is nothing more, if you think about it too complicated, then it's maybe hard to solve, but it's nothing more than a pure thinking mistake. And if you know that it is a thinking mistake, you can actually solve it. And the thinking mistake is easy. You label yourself often over one or just a few incidences. And once you put that label on you, you think that that label is valid for everything you do, right? Maybe you made a few mistakes in the beginning. Maybe you didn't lose. Maybe you lost a few competitions, whatever that is. And then you say, I'm a loser. And before you know, you start to talk about yourself that you are a loser, right? So so that's called labeling. There are many more, but those are definitely a few that I wanted to point out. Also, because of time, I promised you to make a connection with two things. First, there is the physical thing. The reason why we make all this crazy thinking mistakes, if you research that a little bit deeper, our brains are incredibly lazy. We don't like to do the work. And there's a simple physiological, you don't know how you pronounce it correctly, but there's definitely a reason why we do that. Your brain is the organ that takes the most energy from our body. It costs a lot of energy to think well. And this is not a joke. I can easily make a few jokes about this again. So if you're low on energy, you tend to make more thinking mistakes than if you are full of energy. Does that make sense? If you're low of energy, you tend to make more mistakes because your brain, they want to make it easy on you. The generalization is much easier. You know, think about that example that I gave you on Moroccans. That's not an easy thing to say even, right? Even if all the Moroccans in the Netherlands would throw stones at other people, they still don't do that because they're a Moroccan, right? So that's not an easy thing to think about, right? It's much easier to think about, well, I see them throwing all stones, you know, let's all judge them. That's easier. So our brains have a tendency to find the easiest road, right? The easiest way to think. And just start for things that you care about. If you don't care about the immigrant issue, that's fine. I'm okay with that. Don't start there. But there are maybe other places where you feel, okay, maybe I should put in a little bit more effort to think about. Let me give you another example. If you are in a situation where you constantly are fighting, right? Guess what? You have conditioned yourself to react in a certain way, to respond in a fighting way. So you're constantly in arguments. It's much harder to think about what can I do to change the situation. So, and definitely if you don't have energy enough because you don't sleep enough, because you don't eat well, because you don't do the basic things in life not well, you tend to have more thinking mistakes than other people. And then don't immediately put a label on yourself. I'm such an idiot because I make too many thinking mistakes, right? Everyone makes them, even if you know about all these things like I do, you still make them. That's a thinking mistake to think that you don't make thinking mistakes. Does that make sense? So you need to be super aware of them. And when you become super aware of them, you can actually overcome that. Now, and the second thing that I promised to connect you with is with my story of 2 weeks ago, is the levels of consciousness that we are go through, right? You have the first level of consciousness. If you remember, that's the consciousness of me. The world is going a lot about is a lot about me only. And then you have the conscious level of we, where we think more about other people as well. And then you have the third conscious level is the earth, right? You think more as the global perspective, and then lastly the universe. But let me stop with the first two, because that is definitely a thinking mistake that I see a lot with people who are a little bit more on the negative side of the world. That could be either depressed, that could be just in poverty, they could be not so successful in their business life. They take things way too personal, right? So if someone doesn't call you, it could be just because that person forgot, right? It's not because I on purposely did not call you back, right? We often think like, oh yeah, it is because me, right? If I don't get a lot of people on the place, and normally they always coming there, it's not because they hate me, maybe because maybe they don't like the things that I say. But we often take the things way too personal, right? Even if people make arguments with someone, trust me, most of the time the issue is in that person themselves and has very little to do with you. People react way more from a point of what they have been through than in the situation that is actually at hand. Yeah, that's normally how people react. Think about road rage. It's all these crazy people on the road, and suddenly they don't even know you, and they already say, you go to hell, right? And think, what? You don't even know me. How do you know if I go to hell? Does that make sense? So we take things a lot too personal. That's maybe number one, thinking mistake you could make, is that you believe that it's all about you. Most of the time, it's not about you. And it's a really hard to accept truth. Therefore, we don't want to accept it because we want to feel so important in our life. Does that make sense? But most of the things have nothing to do with you. So I can tell you that that also is collectively true, right? So in this podcast, I did some jokes about racial differences, and I did it a little bit on purpose, right? I did it on purpose because I set you a little bit up, because we have that sometimes. We have that sometimes if we say sometimes, if you look at a person, and if I am Asian, then I could very quickly, yeah, you look at me because I'm Asian. I mean, people do that. And now I don't have to explain you what types of group do that in the world, but there are many, right? Whether you're in the Netherlands or in the US, you look at a person, you hardly have to say anything. If you say something with the word nowadays in the Netherlands, you can't say the word negerzoenen anymore, and you can't say jodenkoek anymore, and you can't say, I don't know what you cannot say. We can still say Black Friday sales, I guess, but you can't say a lot of these things because people take these things way too personal. There was actually here a brand, a food brand, a gigantic food brand, and let's say it was discriminatory to a certain group. In this case, it was an Afro-American group. It was really weird because the owner and founder was actually Afro-American and said, no, 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 you cannot take away my brand. You ruined my business. I said, I'm okay with it. So I'm not saying that we should not update the way we think, right? Yesterday I was talking to someone, if we would still go with Sjors and Jimmy. There was a comic book in the Netherlands. If that would be still published today in the way it was published the first time, I do think that we have to change some of these things. I do think that we have to change Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet a little bit, right? But we don't have to take it too far because we take it all way too personal. Does that make sense? A very common mistake. And I think always why, right? Is there a reason why you want to argue? That feels like it. It feels like we have too little of the true rethinking conscious in us. So all these mistakes can be found back actually linked to a couple of things. First of all, think about it like this, right? If you feel you make quite a bit of these things or you struggle with it, don't beat yourself up over it, right? Because it's very normal. But you could think about two things. Think about your energy level, bring your energy up, and you will see the world will be easier to accept. Then when you have no sleep and no energy, it's really true, right? Things don't become so heavy anymore when you have a lot of energy, right? So that's one thing. And then secondly is think about what I've started to teach you guys about, there's a we conscious. Do I think a little bit too much about my own world alone? Right? Or do I see the things in a larger perspective? Because then it becomes also a lot easier. All right, that was it for today, guys. I hope you liked it. A bit serious topic. Um, just one last connections for my people on the podcast Thrive, not survive after child abuse. Yeah, in my work, I must say that a lot of child abuse victims are actually with a few things. They are a little bit more hard. They make common mistakes, and it has always to do with the trust, right? So if you have been molested by family members, you tend to think like, oh, you can't trust any family member. So I had a lot of trust issues because I thought I couldn't trust anymore. So you start to run your life with the false beliefs that you build up. And there are a few very specific false beliefs that abuse victims actually build up in their life. One is guilt, right? They feel very guilty of things. So they always very much think, oh, it's my fault. Sometimes they feel very alone. They think they have to solve all the problems alone. And there's a lot of shame. You cannot tell all these things because everyone is out there to hurt you. Now, nothing was more liberating for me to tell my story to the rest of the world, and no one actually wanted to hurt me. Actually, a lot of people came to help me. So a lot of these weird false beliefs are thinking mistakes, if you want to call it so. So go out there this week and find what your common thinking mistakes are, and if you have them, then let me know what they are, and then we can talk about it. Just send me a message, okay? All right, guys, I will finish Facebook Live here in a second, and then we always leave it open here at Zoom. So if you want to join Zoom, just click on the link that it's in Facebook Live, and then we can continue the discussion. If not, then I will see you next week, and also the people on my podcast. I will hear you all tomorrow. All righty. Let me click this done. It's a lot of, and we're going to stop.